of AgeWell. Based on the participant list, I see that we have a lot of familiar faces in the audience, so I know this will not be news to some of you, but I'll give you just a quick overview and can go to the next slide. So AgeWell's vision is that Canada's leadership in technology and aging benefits the world. Our mission is to develop a community of researchers, older adults, caregivers, partners, and future leaders. And the goal is to accelerate the delivery of technology-based solutions that make a meaningful difference in the lives of Canadians. Next slide, please. So our success story is the incredible amount of researchers and trainees involved in the network. So over 250 researchers and 760 trainees across 43 universities and colleges in Canada. We've developed 118 products, working with over 40 now startups, 4 national innovation hubs across Canada, and most importantly, 4,700 engaged older adults and caregivers that co-create solutions with us. So before we get going with today's webinar, I want folks to tell us a little bit about themselves. So I'm going to launch a poll here, and we're just curious which age group you might be in. So feel free to answer that. So we can see we have a nice cross section there of younger and older adults. So that's really great. I'm going to give you a couple more seconds to vote. And as you're voting, I want to let you know that we are recording today's webinar, so it will be available after the fact on YouTube. And you can type your questions and answers into the chat or into the Q&A function. So you can see our poll there, a nice graph, nice distribution there for you stats nerds. And we're gonna launch another poll, which is asking the question, why did you register for this webinar today? So the first option, perhaps you're someone who is waiting for, has had knee replacement surgery. You might be a caregiver for someone who's had knee replacement surgery or perhaps is waiting as well. Or you're generally interested in mobile health apps, such as the one we're going to learn about today. So again, another reminder, as you're voting here, there will be a survey as well at the end of the webinar. We'll post that link in the chat. And I'm going to end the polling. Looks like everyone who wants to vote has voted. So you can see lots of interest in mobile apps and some users, some folks who either are using maybe this particular app or might benefit from it. So I'm going to end the intro just by saying that my name is Darina Semyonov. You probably all know me from running these webinars. I'm the Policy and Knowledge Mobilization Manager at AgeWell. And I'm going to let Nirtal Shah introduce himself and get going with the webinar.
Sure. Thank you very much, Darina. As Darina said, my name is Nirtal Shah. I'm a physiotherapist at the University of Toronto, as well as the CEO of Curovate. And I've been a physiotherapist for 20 years. And in my work at the University of Toronto, I both do clinical practice. I teach a course specifically on mobile health to kinesiology students. And I teach healthcare providers how to teach other healthcare providers, if that's not too wordy. I'm also involved with some clinical research at the university as well. So that's a brief synopsis of who I am, and the majority of this webinar will focus on Curovate and the mobile app that we've created for older adults following knee replacement. Next. So this is kind of our agenda for today that we'll get through in 40 minutes tops, because I definitely want to leave time for participants to ask questions. So we'll be talking about Curovate. We'll be talking about specifically the knee replacement app. We're talking about it in the context of COVID, what this means for both the company and for older adults undergoing rehabilitation at this time. And then just a brief discussion of the future of what the company is planning to do. If you could just play that video. So this is just a very quick video of the app in real time functioning. And you'll see here basically what the app does. And I'm going to go through each function of the app, but really more importantly, the purpose of each function that the app has and why it came to be. So this is kind of what it looks like. This is the look and the feel of the current app that we've designed for older adults. But I'm going to talk you through each one of these aspects and why they exist inside the app. Next slide. Okay, so Curovate started in, oh, actually, sorry, next slide. So it's just playing the video again. Yeah, I think we're good here. Sorry, back one. There we go. Okay, so Curovate started in 2016. And at the time, myself and a group of engineers developed an app specifically for patients following an ACL reconstruction. So an ACL is one of the 4 ligaments inside the knee. And when it's torn, most people need a surgery to reconstruct it and return back to physical activity in sports. Now, that group is very different than our knee replacement group. So we're talking typically young adults between the ages of 18 to 30 that hurt themselves playing sports or doing physical activity. So that's kind of where it started. And we, I deployed that app to my patients in the clinic. So I was monitoring what they were doing. I was, getting lots and lots of feedback and just kind of giving it to anybody that was willing to use it. And then over the years it evolved and with definitely in large part, thanks to the funding we received from AgeWell, what we've been able to do is we've been able to expand that original app to something that is what you see right now, but also includes rehabilitation for older adults following total knee replacement as well as total hip replacement. So this is kind of your opening screen that you're looking at, where you essentially select from which surgery you had, and then you would break down into subsequent categories of different types of surgeries within each group. Next slide, please. So this is just a typical, you're seeing a still image of a video that would play inside the app. But the way something like this came to be, so this is a simple, contract your hamstring, contract your quadriceps at the same time. So contract the muscles in the front and the back of your thigh. And that seems like a simple thing to do. But the problem is that when patients are sent home with stuff like this, and even at a practice like at the University of Toronto, to this day, I'm still giving patients paper printouts of their exercises. And people are still keeping track on paper or on some form of saying, yes, I did this. No, I didn't do that. I got through 5 of 10 or whatever. And what we heard from patients that are rehabilitating is that that seems, it's very annoying to do. And it seems very archaic when the rest of the world has moved on to things that are far more digital. So simply, in our app, if you're going through your exercise, essentially it'll play like this, where you can see in the top left-hand corner, you see the reps and sets. Those are counting down as the video is playing. And you can see kind of exactly where you're asking the patient to contract or tense and for how many seconds they have to hold it. And in essence, essentially, as they let the video play, this is all being tracked for the patient independently. And they don't have to do any of that tracking themselves or wondering how many of these did I do. So that was a big part of what we're hearing from patients, that they wanted this process to be a lot easier than what they were experiencing. The next slide. And the other common thing we hear all the time is, I forgot how to do that. So even though in the clinic, I will demonstrate an exercise, I will ask the patient to demonstrate the exercise, we will go through it together. They will have a sheet of paper that has the exercise with pictures. Technique is a big issue. The patient comes back the next time or subsequent times, and there are issues in terms of them remembering how to do it, which position their foot is in, their knee is in. So video helps to solve all of that at home, where they're being prescribed these exercises, but now they have guidance through, oh, here's how I'm supposed to do it in the first place. The other cool thing that came about from involving older adults in this process was that we had our ACL app. So we just started giving it to older adults and saying, hey, what do you think of this? And what do you like? What do you not like? And one of the key things we heard from older adults was, well, I'm not going to do that because that person doesn't look like me. Essentially meaning that if they were prescribed exercises that were being demonstrated by a 20-year-old, any inability to do an exercise for them, for some of these older adults we spoke to, was just due to the fact that, well, you're just giving me something that doesn't apply to me. So in designing this app specifically for older adults with knee and hip replacements, we made sure that we got an older adult, exercise model, for lack of a better word, to perform the exercises. Actually, he doesn't mind me sharing this with you, but he has very severe osteoarthritis in his knees, this gentleman that we worked with. So it was important to them to see themselves in what they were doing, because if they saw this 20-something-year-old doing squats or knee bends, in their view, they were like, well, that even if you tell me this is for a knee replacement, this has nothing to do with me. So we found that as interesting learning as we were working with older adults, and we tried to incorporate that throughout, where everything from the instruction to the person doing the exercises was all appropriate for what older adults wanted to see for their rehabilitation. Next. The other thing that I hear from patients also is the fact that they don't know if they're improving or doing any better until they enter a healthcare facility. So until they follow up with their surgeon and get the okay to start 20 minutes of walking, or until they go to their physiotherapist who says, wow, your knee looks great. The patient themselves didn't have a great way of knowing how they were doing outside of healthcare facilities. So when they're home alone, doing their exercises, when they're doing all the rehabilitation on their own, they didn't have a great sense of where they were. Were they keeping track? Were they doing well? And that, that was a problem presented to us. And it was said that why is it that I only know I'm doing better or worse once I go to my healthcare provider? Like, why can't I get a better sense of that? And especially in the early days, I think that's really, really important for people after surgery, that they really want an indication of how they're doing on a very granular level, not just at the 2-week, 3-week, 6-week follow-up. And so what you see here is the home screen of the app. And what happens is, essentially, we are tracking every repetition, every set of the exercise, and all of that is displayed to the user like this. Now, this may look familiar, like if any of you own an iWatch, there's those little circles that you have to complete by the end of the day. And we kind of took concepts from that, where, here they're completing their circle in order to get 100% completion for that week. So they'll see this granularly increase where, it'll change 1%, 2% every time they do an additional exercise. So they have a constant awareness of how they are and how much more they need to do in order to complete their, sets of exercise, their things that they need to do for that day. Next. And this is along those same lines, where adherence is something we talk about a lot in physiotherapy. We talk about it a lot because adherence rates for physiotherapy in general are atrocious. So after major orthopedic surgeries, and knee replacement is no exception, about 20% of people complete what they need to do for their post-operative rehabilitation. So 80% of people are dropping off and not doing what they need to do. Now, this portion is a bit, this portion is a bit of my theory, and grant me the access to be a little bit liberal with this, but after a person gets an ACL reconstruction, which is a sport-specific injury, they receive 6 to 8 to 9 months of rehabilitation. And that's fairly standard across the board. You can go to any physiotherapy clinic here in Toronto. And that's approximately the rehab you'd receive would be 6 to 9 months. After a knee replacement or a hip replacement, based on current government funding, an older adult would receive anywhere from 2 to 3 government-funded appointments, and that's it. That's the entirety of their care, and that's shocking. Like, it's shocking that it's that low in terms of what they are allowed to have access to and what is being paid for. And I think that happens is because the reason I think that happens, one of the reasons, is because I think the bar is set too low. Meaning, an older adult that goes in to get a knee replaced is living with a lot of pain. So they have a lot of pain in some situations. These older adults are having trouble sleeping because they're in so much pain. Difficulty with stairs, difficulty with walking. So there's some major things going on. Once a knee replacement is done, the vast majority of these patients don't experience a lot of pain or a significant reduction in the amount of pain that they had. So unfortunately, we're kind of saying, well, great, check, that's good enough. And I think, you know, if we were to treat them the way we treat athletes, that's not even close to good enough, because that's just step one is like reduction in pain. You know, they should be aiming for being able to climb stairs with no pain, being able to walk the distance they want without pain. Like, there should be many more goals built into what they're doing. And that's part of where this adherence comes in, that are we focusing on what older adults want to achieve? And if we're not, shouldn't we be? Because what they're receiving for postoperative care is severely limited. So that's where pages like this in the app come up, where we want to track their adherence on a daily basis and show them how they're doing to help motivate them to then do things that are greater than just, I got pain relief. Not that pain relief is not important, but just that there's a lot more that they could achieve after having an entire joint replaced. Next. The other thing that both young adults and older adults told us is that they wanted to be able to measure things that you can't measure outside of a healthcare environment. So people have been measuring their body weight, their blood pressure, their blood glucose levels for years. That's a very normal thing that people measure in their homes. You can go to pharmacy down the street and get the equipment you need to measure any one of those things. And it's an accepted norm that people can accurately measure their weight at home. They can accurately measure their blood pressure at home. So one of the key markers for progress and success after a knee replacement, especially early on, is something called knee range of motion. Just simply means how much your knee bends and straightens. So in that, what we wanted is that we wanted to make sure that older adults and younger adults could measure things like knee range of motion. So we built in a way to use just a mobile device to measure things like knee flexion and knee extension, their range of motion. And it's the technical complexity of it is essentially what you see here, which is basically the older adult just has to put the phone on their leg and hit a button in order to be able to get these measures independently with nothing more than their mobile device. And there's a very quick video to demonstrate this in a few slides. Next. And then, of course, we incorporated very simple things such as just reminders. After an older adult goes through a knee replacement, there's a requirement to do rehabilitation exercises 3 times a day, every day, which is a lot. So just simple things like reminders on your phone, because if you're like the vast majority of the world, you rarely leave the house without this thing in your pocket. So things to just remind you to kind of stay on track with your exercises the way, even a human can't do necessarily. It can't remind you 3 times a day to do your exercises. Or I suppose a human could, but it might be very annoying. Next. So with the help of the funding that we received from AgeWell and what we'd already produced leading up to it, what we've managed to do is we've managed to release our current app in the Apple App Store, which is the screenshot that you see here. Next slide. And as well, we've also released in the Google Play Store, and that was a big hurdle to kind of co-develop this app in 2 different platforms and release in both platforms. We've existed since in January 2020, in both the App Store and the Play Store for patients that are rehabilitating from knee replacement, hip replacement, as well as ACL reconstruction. Next slide. Okay, so I'm kind of going a little bit backwards here in terms of now I want to talk about why I created Curovate in the first place. Practicing physiotherapy for 20 years, my biggest frustration has been the lack of access to physiotherapy for those people that need it the most. And that's really why I started my master's in public health at the University of Toronto now, 8 years ago. And when I started my master in public health, I didn't know that it would end up leading to a path in mobile health, but that's what ended up happening because I saw it as the most natural way to disseminate lots of physiotherapy, knowledge and access to people that needed it. And that's kind of why I got into this in the first place. And that's why I've been working in this area. Now the woman in this picture has absolutely no limitations in access to physiotherapy. That's my mom. And she, had a knee replacement. She has the good fortune of having 2 kids that are both physiotherapists. And even with that, she had struggles. So I kind of learned firsthand from her as well in terms of what the real day-to-day life struggles are for a patient going through a knee replacement. What do they need? What kinds of things would augment their rehabilitation process? So I kind of used all of that in my learning to deploy what you see out there in the world now. Next slide. And we talk a little bit about the COVID context. I'm sure many people are tired of hearing about everything in COVID context, but we've had, since COVID has happened around the world, we've had sort of people just kind of talking about it organically. So this is a review that we received in the App Store of somebody that talks about it specifically in the COVID context, where she's saying, listen, I can't get to my physio. It's hard to do this stuff post-surgery, and this app has been a huge help. Next slide. And so similarly, lots of patients fell into this unfortunate time where they had surgery right before COVID, or they had surgery when things were opening up again, but things are opening up in stages as we have here in Toronto. So there was a period of time where elective orthopedic surgery, which is the category that knee replacement falls into, was open and you could get it, but all of the rehabilitation that you needed afterwards was not. So that creates a huge problem that you can get the surgery, but you don't have access to any of the rehabilitation because it's just everything else is shut down. And so that's some of the things that we've been dealing with and hearing about in terms of people using our app. Next slide. And it's led to some pretty neat things. So this gentleman, Miro, from Slovenia, we've had a bunch of email exchanges with him. And it's just neat to hear about somebody, from a totally different part of the world and his experiences using the app, living through COVID, having a knee replacement. And so it's been neat to see, and kind of an organic thing that we've seen, not that we've intentionally gone out and endorsed it in the times of COVID, but we've just kind of seen this kind of thing occurring more and more in our reviews, in our emails, and our messages on social media. And we're hoping for more of that same growth to help people that are struggling with access even more so now. Next slide. And if you can just play this, it's just a short video. So this is as I mentioned earlier, this is just that short clip to show you how the measurement feature of the app works. So as I mentioned, it's as technically complex as what you see on the screen. The person is essentially moving their phone from one point in their leg to the other, hitting the measure button, and then moving it again. And we're using sensors that already exist inside the phone in your pocket to measure joint angles. And that's what you see. That's what you see there. I had actually a really good question from an older adult who said, oh, well, that's fine, but after like my knee replacement, there's no way I could, hold my phone here or there. So yes, absolutely. In some cases early on, post-surgery, you might actually need some help to move the thing around. But the other thing we implemented is that you can actually just hit measure, and then it won't start measuring until you're actually able to situate the phone in the spot that we need it to be. So we kind of implemented that as in, like, you know, if it's on your lower leg, you're gonna have a hard time seeing the buttons. So just, you can hit it and then place it on your lower leg. And then after that point, it will do the rest. So that 30-second clip is essentially how long it takes for kind of from start to finish for somebody to acquire the measurements that you see here on the screen. Next slide. Sorry, one more, just the video playing again. There we go. Perfect. So what we've created so far is to help patients, as I mentioned before, that have knee replacements, hip replacements, and ACL reconstruction. So that in US numbers, that's a population of about 2.5 million people annually that have that surgery in the US. And that's our current our current app that exists in both the Play Store and the App Store. What we plan to do next is a mobile app for everyone that has knee or hip osteoarthritis. And you'll see that, not very revealing, but you'll see that that's X million patients, because everything that we have are just estimates. There are millions of people living with osteoarthritis that are awaiting knee or hip replacement, or are a year, 2 years, 5 years from knee or hip replacement. So the X is just because we don't even know. That number is massive. In estimates from the US, it's somewhere around 32 million people that are living with osteoarthritis currently. So the next plan is that we take what we've already done. We have the framework already built. And what we do is we provide rehabilitation to all those people that have knee and hip osteoarthritis that are either awaiting surgery or may need surgery in a couple of years, or have knee pain specifically because of osteoarthritis. So there's some fantastic, structured protocols that you can provide patients that will give them the rehabilitation that they need in order to improve the function of their knee. I recognize it's more challenging. So it's going to be, more challenging than it is to provide a protocol for knee or hip replacement, but it's certainly feasible. And the way we plan to do that is that we would stage people. So through a simple, the same way that Dorina asked you some survey questions at the start of this webinar, it would be exactly like that. We would ask a series of questions that are evidence-based, that, as you answer certain questions, you're filtered into a certain area, and then you'd be provided with at least a starting point for some of your exercises. So that's our next plan for addressing older adults living with osteoarthritis that have knee or hip pain that have not had surgery. And then the future of the company for Curovate as a whole is to expand into areas such as other very, very poorly served areas, such as cardiovascular rehab. So people that have shunts and things put into their hearts and their valves, those people, the rehabilitation they receive is very, very limited here in Ontario, but elsewhere as well, where there's virtually no rehabilitation provided to some of them. And then beyond that, tackling some of my big passions, such as things like diagnosing low back pain and helping the, closest estimate is there's about 261 million people, adults who have low back pain in the United States at some point in their life. So those numbers are huge, and the economic costs of low back pain are astronomical. So those are some of the areas we plan to expand to, and then also offering things like video conferencing physical therapy. It's funny, I've had this slide for a couple of years, and I used to throw this up there, and when we got to video conferencing physical therapy, people that I was speaking to, they'd be like, well, that's never going to work. And it's ironic, because in this world, that's all that really exists, right? So now in this COVID context, video physiotherapy sessions sound brilliant, where, 5 months ago, it sounded ridiculous. Like, why would I see my physical therapist on a Zoom call like that? What good is that? And now that is the norm, right? This is how people are receiving post-operative care, is via video. So those are our plans. This is where we are now, and this is where we hope to be in the near future. And I think I'm just on time, maybe even 5 minutes early. So I wanted to definitely leave some time for some questions, and I'll let Dorina take over from here.
Thanks, Nirtal. That was amazing and really interesting to hear about older adult experiences and wanting to see themselves in the app. So it's very cool that you've been able to incorporate some of that feedback into it. I'm wondering too, if just a technical thing before we go into the questions and answers, where there's a little bit of feedback. I don't know if it's your headset or your, maybe either like lose the headset or
sure, let's try
or stand very still, but I think it's your headset. How's that?
Can you hear me now?
Yeah, we can hear you. Okay.
I will project.
Perfect. Yeah, there's a little bit of feedback, I think, because you're a very dynamic presenter that moves around a lot, which is great.
Sorry about that.
It's all good. So we've got a couple of questions coming in from the audience. The first one is saying, thank you. Can you speak to the accuracy of the measurement or the ROM? I'm sure that's an acronym that you know what that means in terms of what this app takes.
Sure. Based on the ROM, ROM is just it's acronym for range of motion. It's physio speak, so I'm guessing it's physio asking the question. It's a good question. So we've tested it clinically. Now, let me first be very clear. We haven't tested it at a research level where we have compared it to a gold standard. We haven't done that level. That is our near future plan. We've tested it with clinicians, and we're finding that there's a difference of about 3 to 5 degrees between clinician measuring range of motion in the clinic for knee flexion, knee extension, and then the app measuring that same person at that same angle. We've done our best in terms of, like, we've had somebody would hold the knee in that specific position. We'd have a physiotherapist measure the angle, and then we'd come in with the app and then measure the angle and compare the two. So it's been about 3 to 5 degrees difference between the clinician and the app. And if I remember my research well, the inter-rate of reliability between two clinicians, so physiotherapist A and physiotherapist B, is roughly the same. It's about 3 to 5 degree different. So I think we're kind of right in the acceptable range.
Great, and we're getting lots of questions coming in, which is fantastic. I'm going to remind people also that we have a survey about this webinar, so we'll post a link to that in the chat, but we'll keep going here with the questions and answers. So this one is from Lena. She's asking about data privacy, and so she's saying, I was not clear what data is provided to the physiotherapist, and are there any issues of data privacy?
Sure. Let me talk about it from the patient end first, and then I'll talk about it from the provider end second. So from the patient end, what happens is that the only data we collect about the person is their surgery or injury date, which we have to have in order to provide them with an accurate protocol, the type of surgery that they had. We ask about their gender and age, but we don't necessarily, it's not a requirement. They don't have to provide that if they don't want to. So really the main points of data are their surgery or injury date and the type of surgery they had and their email address. That's about what we collect from them. And then for inside the app, we do collect everything. So their adherence rates and all those other things, we do collect that inside the app. That is protected in terms of it is in an encrypted server. The people that are accessing it are essentially myself, as well as the lead developer on our team, who, for engineering reasons, he has to. And that's about it. So there isn't, we've explicitly in our privacy policy, we don't sell the data, we don't share the data with other organizations or institutions or whatever, and that is intentional because it is we want to protect the patient's information. From a clinician end, the patient has the option to share anything that they want. That's entirely up to them. And that is sort of just on a, here's my app, here's what I'm doing, here's what I've done, here's my range of motion. They're welcome to share any of that, and that's entirely in their hands. And that's kind of the way I think it should be for some of this health data that is in the patient's hands, that they have the option of sharing that. As a provider in its current, in its current iteration, the clinician can't then go in and look up the data for their patient as things stand right now.
Great, thank you. Brian is asking about whether the app has pre-surgery exercises for those of us anticipating knee or hip surgery.
So it does for our ACL reconstruction. It doesn't yet for knee or hip replacement. What I've done as a clinician, and I'm going to specify that this is as a clinician, so this is not a blanket recommendation for everyone. What I've done as a clinician is that I've gone into the app and seen where somebody falls in. So I kind of can get a sense of this is their function, and I know they can do these things. So at that point, I will put them at a certain stage of the app, and they can carry on with exercises until they get their surgery. So Brian, if this is a question for you specifically, I'd be happy to chat with you after the webinar. I think Darina or Tasha can share my email address, and you can just email me.
Great. So there's a question about new features that will be added in the future. I feel like you spoke about that a little bit at the end, but is there anything you'd like to add?
Yeah, so inside of the app, we're really looking for ways to improve adherence. Like, that's the whole point. We never set out to make an app for the sake of making an app. What we really want to do is, does this get us to the end goal of allowing patients to do their postoperative rehabilitation, to do it more consistently, and therefore get better patient outcomes? So one of the features we're going to implement in the future is a physiotherapy explainer video, for lack of a better word. So every single exercise is demonstrated and you can see it. But one of the missing things that we're hearing from patients is, I want to know why I'm doing that exercise. I want to know like what muscle I'm working on, like the kinds of things that you would get when you speak to a physiotherapist. So, the longer term plan is to then have kind of like a simple explainer video, not as part of the exercise, but separate, that people can navigate to and say, oh, okay, now I know why I'm doing this. So that's one of the things that we're thinking about.
Great. So we're going to keep going here. Lots of interesting questions. So this is from Angus. So a couple, maybe I'll just give you the first one. Do organizations have the option to customize exercise video options, or are users restricted to the preset videos tutorials? Yeah.
Sorry, the start of that question was, do organizations, is that what it is?
Yeah, so it sounds like this person is interested in organizations being in, if an organization was to use your app as part of their practice. And it's interesting because there's another kind of a related question, which you might want to answer first, about whether physiotherapists or rehab clinics are openly accepting the use of this app. So kind of how far have you gotten in that area, and then can they customize them if you're doing that?
Okay. So the way the app is currently, each one of like knee replacement, hip replacement, post-surgical protocols are based on 15 to 20 clinically published rehabilitation protocols that are essentially, what happens is that we took the ones that existed in the vast majority of the rehab protocols and included the things that most of them agree with. So I'll give you a simple example. For total knee replacement, hydrotherapy has really good evidence. So after a knee replacement, if you do exercises in a pool, there's really good research on that says it's great and it helps. We didn't include that in our app because we're first and foremost about access. And I know from my patients, and I know many patients have lots of trouble. They don't have a pool near them. They don't have access to it. It's not open. So that has good evidence, but it didn't make it into our app because it presents an access barrier. So it's based on clinical published guidelines and protocols. That's where it came from. So it didn't just come from a bunch of made up extras, but very specific for knee replacement and hip replacement. So that's where the protocol inside the app exists. Right now, a physiotherapist can't go in and change our protocol. And what that would involve essentially would be, and I think this is what you're alluding to, would be business-to-business partnerships with Curovate and say a health organization like a hospital or a clinic, where we then work together and then we create a portal. And then that portal would allow an individual physiotherapist to change an exercise for an individual patient or for their set of patients. And then that would then be incorporated into that app. That healthcare portal right now does not exist. So we've not made that yet. And that's the type of things that we're exploring with clinics, hospitals, other healthcare organizations. So that's what it would take in order for that to happen. We'll never open it up such that a single provider can change the protocol for patients as a whole. I started in on this because I wanted it to be kind of a patient-centric thing. And so that's our primary focus, but we are also now, talking to other businesses and healthcare organizations to explore this other option that you mentioned.
Great. Yeah. So that's, that kind of, I think, answers some of the other related questions from Angus about, business model and is this only available in the App Store? So it sounds like yes. And then the business model would be something that's evolving as you're just describing. Related to kind of the line of conversation about sharing with clinics or hospitals, there's a question also about in terms of the data collected, are there completely, is this a completely standalone platform, or is part of that work that you're doing thinking about integration, and having an integration plan with electronic medical records, for example?
The few conversations that I've had with some hospitals here in Ontario suggest to me that the process of integrating with electronic health records is challenging, and that's fair, but challenging, and at least the few that I've spoken to, it wouldn't be worth it for them to integrate with their health records at this time. That might change in the future, but that's what I'm hearing right now. Yes, so it is right now a standalone platform that is outside of a hospital system. It doesn't mean that it won't evolve down the road. What I envision, though, even if that does happen, is a very explicit opt-in clause by the patient, where the patient opts to share their data with the healthcare provider or the healthcare facility. That's kind of what I'm imagining for the future if that were to happen. But I would still like to leave it in the patient's hands in terms of what they share. And in the world of privacy and security, that's kind of where things seem to be headed anyway, with lots of new legislations around data privacy and security, that they're mandating that things be much more opt-in as opposed to just a default, you're going to share your data because you downloaded the app.
Right. Makes sense. This one's an easy one.
Great.
Maybe I'll as you get in some hard questions, which is interesting. But are there any similar apps, and how do you differ? And I'm going to weave also part of another question into that as well, which is someone saying, this is Jean, so this is a sessional lecturer from U of T. The TRP program there. And so curious if you've heard about the GLAD Danish hip and knee osteoarthritis rehab program. Might be a good collaboration. I'm sure you have. So I guess, there's other programs and other things happening. So how is the app different, and kind of what makes you stand out?
Sure. So I think the first way that we are different is that we are very much patient facing. So there are companies that exist even in Toronto where it's a technology company that will take any clinical content you want from a hospital or from a clinic, and they will plug it into their app. And you know, that's kind of a that's their business to business partnership. That's their whole plan. And so what happens is that the clinical content comes from a specific hospital, a specific clinic, but it's also tied to that specific hospital or clinic, which I don't see that as a way to improve access, because for someone to then access that, they still had to come through that gatekeeper of the hospital or the clinic. And those exist right now, and there are companies that are doing exactly that. So as I keep saying, we did intend to be patient facing, and that's why we are. We wanted to be something that patients could access regardless of location and regardless of where they received their surgery. In terms of apps that are patient facing, that are for things like knee and hip replacement, there is one called Pocket Physio out of the UK, and they provide rehabilitation exercises on an app for patients following knee replacement, which sounds identical. The difference there, though, is that what they provide essentially is just a laundry list of exercises. So you as a patient go into it and you're presented with a list of 25 exercises with no guidance in terms of when to do what. It's not staged. There isn't